Let me ask you something. When was the last time you really celebrated your own birthday? Not just a dinner, not just a few texts or a post on social media, but a day that actually felt like it was yours. A day where you allowed yourself to be seen, to be appreciated, to exist loudly. If that question makes you pause, you're not alone. There's a quiet kind of person in this world. The ones who treat their birthday like any other day. They don't want attention. They don't announce the date. Sometimes they even work through it, pretending it's nothing special. But beneath that calm surface, there's a story, a psychology, a deeper reason why some of us can't seem to celebrate ourselves. Because the truth is, no one is really indifferent to their birthday. We might say we don't care, but behind that sentence is often something unspoken, something emotional, something protective. You see, people who treat their birthday like a normal day often share one quiet trait. They've learned not to expect celebration. Somewhere along the line, they realize that when you expect too much, you invite disappointment. Maybe there was a year when no one remembered. Maybe they grew up in a home where birthdays weren't a big deal. Or maybe they simply felt unseen too many times, and their mind learned to protect itself by lowering expectations. So now, they shrug and say, it's just another day. But it's not. It's a silent kind of armor, a way to avoid the sting of unmet expectations. Psychologists call this emotional self-protection. It's a subtle defense mechanism where we preemptively dull our feelings to avoid pain. And it's not just about birthdays, it's about recognition, validation, attention, the small ways we hope others might show they care. When those moments go unfulfilled enough times, the brain adjusts its beliefs. It whispers, don't hope too loudly next time. But let's go deeper. There's another reason some people treat their birthday like it's nothing. They're uncomfortable being the center of attention. Not because they dislike it, but because it feels undeserved. Self-worth, for many people, is a fragile balance between humility and shame. They might secretly believe that celebration is for people who've earned it, for achievements, milestones, or visible success. And so they think, what's there to celebrate? I'm just me. That quiet sentence carries a heavy psychological weight. It's rooted in conditional self-esteem, the idea that we only deserve love or recognition when we meet certain conditions. Do well enough, achieve enough, be perfect enough, then maybe you'll deserve it. So they quietly skip the cake, not out of apathy, but out of an unspoken sense of unworthiness. But there's also a third group, people who simply find birthdays overwhelming. The noise, the attention, the obligation to be happy. They may be introverted, highly empathetic, or emotionally attuned. They feel everything deeply, so even something meant to be joyful can feel heavy. The pressure to smile, to entertain, to respond to messages. To some, that's exhausting. They'd rather slip through the day unnoticed, not because they don't care, but because they care too much. There's a quiet paradox here. The same people who minimize their birthday often go out of their way to make others feel special on theirs. They remember details, send heartfelt messages, plan surprises, because they know what it feels like to go unnoticed, and they don't want anyone else to feel that way. So what's really happening here? Why does a day meant for celebration feel so complicated for some of us? It all comes down to identity. Birthdays force us to pause and acknowledge our existence. They remind us that time is passing, that we're aging, that maybe we haven't done everything we thought we would by now. And for some, that reflection doesn't feel good. Instead of joy, it stirs up quiet anxiety. Am I where I thought I'd be? Have I changed enough? Do I deserve to be celebrated when I still feel incomplete? So the easiest thing to do is to downplay it, to say, it's just another day, and move on like it means nothing. But inside, it often means everything. It's just safer not to admit it. Here's something fascinating from a psychological perspective. When we avoid celebrating ourselves, our brain actually starts associating self-recognition with discomfort. Over time, we learn to suppress not only pride, but joy itself. It's a phenomenon known as self-suppression bias, where we subconsciously downplay positive emotions to maintain emotional control. In other words, the more we avoid being celebrated, the harder it becomes to feel worthy of celebration at all. But here's the paradox. Even if you tell yourself you don't care, part of you still checks your phone on that day. You still notice who remembers. You still feel something when someone says, "Hey, happy birthday." That flicker, that quiet warmth in your chest, is your true self peeking through the walls you built. Because no matter how much we try to be detached, humans are wired for acknowledgement. We crave to be seen, not for our achievements, but for our simple existence. Birthdays, at their core, are a symbolic reminder of that need. They whisper, "You're still here, you matter." And maybe that's why they can hurt. Because if the world doesn't echo that message back to us, it can feel like silence where there should have been music. But here's where it gets interesting. What if the act of treating your birthday like a normal day isn't always sadness? What if it's something else, something deeper, maybe even peaceful? That's what we'll uncover next, because not everyone who avoids celebration is avoiding themselves. Some people have simply found meaning in the ordinary, and that, in its own quiet way, might be the purest form of peace there is. Because not everyone who treats their birthday like an ordinary day is hiding from emotion. Some are simply at peace with life itself. They don't need candles or noise or validation to remind them that they exist. They wake up, breathe, and quietly thank the world for another sunrise. For them, every day already feels like a gift, so why single one out? This kind of person has learned something that many people spend a lifetime chasing, that happiness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calm. Sometimes it's the quiet satisfaction of knowing who you are, even when no one else is watching. When someone like that says, "It's just another day," they don't mean it in defeat. They mean it in contentment, because they've reached a point where they don't need to be celebrated to feel alive. Psychologically, this falls under what researchers call emotional self-sufficiency. It's not detachment, it's balance. It's the ability to generate a sense of worth internally, rather than relying on external praise. People with high emotional self-sufficiency often display a strong internal locus of control. In other words, they believe their happiness comes from within, not from how others treat them. So when the world forgets to clap, they don't crumble, because they were never performing for applause in the first place. But even that peace can have layers. Sometimes it's a hard-earned calm, the kind that only comes after years of disappointment, reflection, and acceptance. It's like they've lived through enough forgotten birthdays to realize the most important person to celebrate them is themselves. So instead of waiting for others, they quietly create their own rituals. Maybe a long walk, maybe a new book, maybe a coffee in silence. They don't announce it, but those small acts are celebrations in disguise. Proof that they're still here, still choosing life, still choosing themselves. And yet, even the calmest souls have moments of reflection on that day. Because birthdays have a strange way of making time feel visible. Each year becomes a mirror, reflecting who we were, who we are, and who we're becoming. It's both beautiful and bittersweet. You might look back and think, "I thought I'd be somewhere else by now." But maybe, just maybe, the place you're standing in, the ordinary life you've built, is exactly where you were meant to be. There's something deeply human about marking time. It reminds us that life is fragile, and that we're only here for a short while. So even if you don't celebrate with balloons or cake, it's still worth taking a moment to breathe and whisper, "I made it another year." That single sentence can carry more meaning than any party ever could, because the real gift of a birthday isn't attention, it's awareness. Awareness of how far you've come. Awareness of how many times you kept going, even when no one saw you. Awareness that, despite everything, you're still here, still capable of joy, still capable of change. And maybe that's the deeper psychology of people who treat their birthday like a normal day. They've shifted from expectation to appreciation. They no longer chase the idea of being celebrated by others. They celebrate the quiet miracle of being alive. That's not sadness, that's maturity, that's growth. There's a quiet wisdom in realizing that the world doesn't owe us celebration. That the truest form of love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's found in small acts of kindness, in ordinary moments that stack together and form a life. So when someone says, "I don't really celebrate my birthday," maybe they're not rejecting joy. Maybe they've just learned to find it somewhere else. Still, if that's you, if you're the kind of person who lets your birthday pass quietly, here's something I want you to remember. You don't need to throw a party. You don't need a crowd, but don't forget to acknowledge yourself. Not with noise, but with presence. Look back on the year you've lived and give yourself credit for every small victory no one else noticed. For every time you got up again. For every smile you forced until it became real. For every time you chose to stay kind in a world that isn't always gentle. That's what birthdays are truly for. Not to measure how loved you are, but to remind you how far you've come in learning to love yourself. Because when you strip away all the expectations, all the pressure, all the noise, a birthday isn't really about celebration, it's about recognition. Recognition that you've survived another cycle of time, that you've changed, even if just a little, that you've grown in ways no one else can see. And if no one else tells you this, let me say it now. You deserve to be proud of that. You deserve to pause for one moment and realize that being alive, being present, is worth honoring. Maybe that's the secret truth of those who treat their birthday like a normal day. They've outgrown the need for permission to exist. They've learned that peace can be found in quiet reflection. That self-celebration doesn't always need a stage. Sometimes it just needs silence. So if your next birthday feels ordinary, if the world doesn't notice, don't let that take away its meaning. Light a candle for yourself, even if no one's watching. Not to make a wish, but to remind yourself that the flame still burns, that you're still here, and that alone is something worth celebrating. Because maybe the greatest form of maturity is realizing that life's most important moments don't always come wrapped in noise. Sometimes they arrive in quiet rooms with no audience, no decorations, just you, your breath, and the realization that existing is enough. And when you can find gratitude in that stillness, you've already mastered what many spend their whole lives chasing: peace with yourself.